The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show, the home of Googlization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy shift going on in the world of business, technology, and HR. Here's your host, Ira Wolf, and co-host Keith Campagna.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show, and welcome to Googlization Nation. If you're not a part of Googlization Nation, I hope you'll join. It's our free community. We're now about 1,200 strong. We're growing pretty rapidly, and you'll get updates about the guests and about our podcast, and also weekly starting to do webinars with some experts as well, and you'll get notices about that, which also brings me up to the point of, if you go to geeksgeezersgooglization.com, that's the website, or you can go to besthrpodcast.com, takes you to the same place. Literally just minutes ago, I went up and I purchased Best HR Webinars. And that'll take you a direct link to all the upcoming webinars that I've got, and it will also take you to all the previous webinars. Everything's recorded, so you get to listen to those. Now, any of the live ones that I'm doing are also may have SHRM, if they meet the credentials. There will be SHRM credits, PDC credits, professional development credits, available for some, not all, but some of those. And just kind of give you a quick rundown. If you go to, as I said, Best HR Webinars, see the Talent Desert. That's a repeat. We're actually doing an encore performance with Dr. Ed Gordon. We're talking about the current and future labor markets, especially with job skills. Tuesday, I've got John Sinai. John is, he's South African. He's actually had Singularity University in Africa. He's just an incredible guy. He's got great stuff going on about the future. And one of the things that when I reached out to him, he was talking about our world going from complicated to complex, and how we have to approach it not to be efficient, but to be robust. And I thought that was not only clever, it resonated. It is because we keep looking of what is it going to take to get to this new normal, or whatever one would call it. He calls it Future Next. So that's Tuesday. And again, you can get to that by going to besthrwebinars.com. The following week, we've got Diane Hamilton, Dr. Diane Hamilton. Dr. Hamilton was one of our guests a while ago. Yeah. And she wrote a book, Cracking the Curiosity Code. She's working on some new projects. She works with some amazing companies and amazing people. So that's there. And then the following week, we actually have somebody from HC Moneyball, which is Human Capital Moneyball. And we're going to talk about the velocity of opportunity in diversity and inclusion. And it's pretty striking. There's not only a gender gap and a pay gap, not only genders, but also between races. But the velocity, the opportunities are just not presented within the same company to people of race and color and different ethnicities. So kind of amazing. And she's got the data to back it up, which is the amazing thing. So we got a lot going on. So if you go to, if you want to keep track of most of what I do on a weekly basis, other than the regular business, selling tests, it's doing the podcast, the Geeks, Geezers, Googlization, and now we started to do the webinars. And that's just the beginning. We have some good stuff going on.
Ira, I can't imagine two people on earth that could keep up with what you're doing.
I can't. Yeah, I'm struggling on my own.
I love the guests that you have coming on. Dr. Diane, I spoke with her, but I wasn't able. I think it was like an off day kind of thing where you and her recorded the podcast. But her and I spoke.
It's been a while, yeah.
Great conversations, dude. Great topics. I'm curious what he means by robust. That's words are funny these days.
Hey, go to besthrwebinars.com and register, Keith.
There you go.
So no, he and actually in the I think I did that on the outline, but if not, or on the registration page, but if not, it's in a LinkedIn post. He almost every day, I don't know if he does it every day, but almost every day he releases like a 5-minute video and he talks about something. And I happened to catch with that one because it always resonates with me, talking about complicated versus complex. It was a concept that I picked up I don't know how long ago. It was, I think, a Harvard Business Review article or something. And it talked about how we used to live in a simple world, and then it became complicated, and people got confused by that. And now we're in this complex world. And he gives some great examples of what the difference is. And also, he says, but the challenge is it's not just becoming faster and better. We have to think differently. And he didn't go into too much detail with that, but that was why I challenged him to do it. Again, he lives in South Africa, and we had to figure out the time zone. So we're doing it at 1:00 on next Tuesday. But I'm really excited about it. He's a super bright guy. He's easy to listen to. He's got that great South African accent, and he's just down to earth. I mean, he's certainly for the respect and for the position, how well he's respected in people who follow the futurists. So really excited about that.
Sweet.
So you're just coming back from a couple days off?
Yeah. It was a wild trip. It's almost like I planned it perfectly, where we got some really good news from the ROI shop, where Ira, we're seeing, and I don't know if it's ironic or intentional, but we are seeing a massive uptick in HR vendors, HR tech vendors coming back to us, circling back to us from earlier in the year. Mm-hmm. Getting ready to just move forward. There's something to be said for the organizational development. I know that Tim and us are going to talk about, leadership development, but I get the sense that there's, at least from a sales perspective, vendors are feeling more comfortable with putting their best foot forward now to, I'll say, recharge the market, right? Go after it a little bit more. But it's really interesting that, it's wild, dude. The momentum of the business world came to such a screeching halt. For those of us that are out there trying to regain momentum, you can almost feel it instantly because it's been lacking for so long. It's a wild.
Well, I wish I could say that, and maybe it's I was wrapped up doing other things, but you've heard me say that before. I'm still in shock. Because in the beginning of March and end of February, when this started to happen and conferences started to get, go away, and I've lived through a lot of these recessions, but the most recent ones were certainly 9/11 and 2008. And when everybody quit hiring, when unemployment jumped, no one called me about testing. Nobody said, "Hey, do you have a good pre-employment test? We're thinking of instituting this now. This is a great time to do it." Our business was up 50%. It not only didn't stop, but it continued. And so this is a whole other conversation because we want to get to Tim Spiker, who's our guest today. We're talking about leadership, which is a whole other challenge. One of the things that I'm wondering, and I'll be interested to hear his take, is everybody went into the shell. And, especially in HR and every day you read that everybody laid off all their business development people. The only people that they kept on staff were their tech, and support people. But everything went on freeze mode. But the market's not that. I mean, we still have high unemployment. The unemployment numbers are continuing to go up. We still have bad news. The pandemic's not under control by any means. So why is it? And there's obviously a lot of companies that are still hiring. Whether it's distribution or grocery stores or pharmacies or, it's not restaurants, the entertainment fields, the industry's still shot. But there's other industries that are manufacturing. I mean, we still have to eat and feed and build, people are building again and infrastructure. And those companies are still struggling. And I think what's happened is that excluding the entertainment business and hospitality, the other companies that are still strong decided they have to do it better. They've got to take this opportunity and regroup and do it better than they did in the past. And that opens the door up for the HR tech. So, despite the fact that we may see that 30 or 40% of companies go under, the 60% that's going to survive recognize that they have to do it better.
And we're going to bring Tim in a minute, right? Yep. But I want him to be ready because you and I have this weird like Twilight Zone thing going on because we were talking about all of this a year ago. We were talking about a massive need, and I posted on LinkedIn because the thought literally occurred to me yesterday. I posted on LinkedIn about it. Did anyone else notice the massive compelling event that took place, right? Like there's a huge call to action, and it's going to separate the pretenders from the contenders. And that speaks to every bit of an organization, whether that's customer service, R&D, sales, recruitment, all of it. Like the time now for an organization to pull ahead of their peers and their competition, I don't think there's been anything like it. I mean, you've been around longer than I am with regards to the number of market resets and recessions and whatnot. I think now is a phenomenal opportunity to really gain a lot of ground on or get ahead of your competitors.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And again, people are really struggling. And right before we head to Tim, and this sort of sums up where we were right after we did the first session of the Talent Desert with Dr. Gordon, and he was talking about, despite 50 million people on unemployment, we still have this huge skill gap. I get a call from a guy. I won't even tell you the state, so nobody can recognize it. But it was out in the Midwest, it's actually the Central States, and he's got a small company. He's got about 60 employees. And he right now has $120 million of proposals. He's in the construction business. $120 million of proposals on his desk that he can't fulfill because he can't find superintendents, project managers, and tradespeople to fill them.
Right. Incredible.
Yeah.
It starts from the top.
Yeah, and it goes back to the skills. It goes back to, there's 50 million people unemployed, but you can't take everybody and throw them into a construction job, and you can't take people who were in construction or working in a hotel and put them into an operating room. So we still have these skill gaps, and those are the companies. That's why he reached out. He had to do that, which leads into our guest today, which is Tim Spiker. We just met Tim 2 minutes before the show. He's the founder of a company called The Apereo, which I've got to talk. We'll find out what that means. We had a guest on a few months ago. I don't know if you remember, Keith. Her company's called Apereo. So we got The Apereo and we got Apereo. He's also founder of Who, Not What Principle, and he's the author of a book, The Only Leaders Worth Following, which is why what we're going to talk about today. I never thought of that question. We think about what are the characteristics and who do you read, but I don't know if anybody's ever asked me, and I'm one of those old guys. I don't know if anybody's asked me in all those years of why do I follow that person? It's sort of what qualities does he have, but not that. So, Tim, welcome to Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization.
Thanks, Ira. Thanks, Keith.
Oh, welcome.
So, did we cover your bio? Is there anything I missed in there? I know it goes longer than that.
That's plenty on the bio. Plenty on the bio. Actually, I want to start by congratulating you, Ira, because if you decided you wanted besthrwebinars.com and you just went and got that thing, that doesn't always work out that way. So congratulations on picking that up and making sure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate you even recognizing that. I can't believe it. I actually went up a couple weeks ago, and what got it to me as I was preparing for this show, we went up and got Best HR Podcasts, and I go, there's no way that's available. We can do hyphens, we can do something else, .net, .biz, but no, it's available. So
there's that magical moment where you click on it, like, man, there's
no way. Because I've had a lot of other ideas that it was like, oh, no one ever thought of this before, and they go, oh, not available. So been done that. You tell you're a marketing guy too, right?
So the congratulations on that. Then I noticed Keith tried to make a point that you're older than he is, so maybe that's a condolence on that side. So
Yeah, well, I'm I'm definitely the geezer of the two of us, except for technology and doing all these things. So, but he's got an excuse. He's raising two boys. So, so hey, let's start out. You wrote this book. What certainly caught my eye was the title of your book. Well, let's go to Apereo. What is Apereo?
Apereo is Latin for the reveal, and the work that we do is primarily in the space of revealing truths about leadership that are absolutely critical that not enough people are recognizing or talking about. So that's why we are the Apereo.
Perfect. So that leads into the next question. You also have, it says you're the founder of Who Not What Principle. Talk to us about what is that, and how did you figure that out?
Well, I didn't do it alone, as most stories of substance. There were many other people involved, but I was working for a boutique consulting firm in leadership development space, and we had, you're talking about Tess, we had a lot of personality, natural ability, and leadership 360 measurements on the people that were spending time with us a week at a time. And we decided to crunch those numbers and look for correlations. And my colleague, Vanessa Kiley, she was our resident number cruncher. And she dug in to see if there are any, people, our clients would ask us, is there a magical formula between personality, natural ability that produces or has a better chance of producing a more effective leader? So we had the data, we looked into it. I still remember the evening, it was late evening, one day, walked into her office. What did you find? And she said nothing, because there were no correlations. And we were disappointed by that at a certain level, but at least I had an answer when the clients would ask that question. And as I was walking out of Vanessa's office, she said, but we did find a correlation somewhere where we weren't looking. To which I turned around and said, well, tell me about that. And I love research stories where you find something different than you were looking for. And that was our story. And what she found is that within the confines of our Leadership 360, we had 8 different categories. And what we found is that just 2 of our 8 categories were driving almost 70% of the variability in the assessment. And, if those 8 things were all equally important, 2 areas should have been worth 25%. Years later, Vanessa reran the research when we had 10 times the data, and that number went all the way up to 77%. So those 2 areas of leadership were significantly more important than the other 6 areas. And about 3 years later, after I was gone from the consulting firm at that point, but I was sitting in my office one day, and it was like the bell went off. And I just looked at those 8 characteristics and noticed that there was something different about those 2 that were driving the lion's share of leadership effectiveness. And the reality of it is that those 2 were about who the leader is as a human being, and the other 6 were about what a leader does. And that's when it all clicked. And that's the Who Not What principle, which is 3/4, to round it down from 77%, 3/4 of our effectiveness as leaders comes from who we are, not what we do.
So you got us sitting at the edge of our seats here, Tim.
I know you're killing me.
So
what are those 2? Let's do the drum roll and get the envelope.
The 2 things are being inwardly sound and being others focused. Now, those we can break down into a lot of component parts, but if we just keep it there at that high level, I think most people will hear those terms and say, yeah, I think I have a rough idea of what it means to be inwardly sound, and I have a rough idea of what it means to be others focused. I was doing a radio interview a few weeks ago, and the person who was interviewing me said, so when you say inwardly sound, you mean the person's not a dumpster fire? And I thought, well, that's one way to put it. But you're talking about people who are self-aware, who are personally secure. They don't need the world to tell them how great they are in order to have a sense of settledness and confidence about who they are. They're purposeful. They're investing their life rather than just spending it, to borrow a term from the On Purpose person. And when we think about that, that's a person who's inwardly sound, kind of carrying those qualities. And then others focused, these falling into that category are terms that people are going to be familiar with. And you just mentioned Dr. Diane Hamilton and her curiosity work. Curious is in there. Empathic is in there. I think you guys had a chance to talk about empathy not long ago with Lisa Schwartz. I think you had on your show talking about empathy.
Yep.
So that's an outward focusing. Empathy saying that I, as the leader, am not the only person that matters in this equation. The emotions and realities of other people matter too. And then we get into ideas like humility comes up as a big one. And so those are the things that swim in that pool of being others focused. So if I am a stable, reliable person, and I'm showing up in this leadership position, not for my own gratification, not for my own bank account, not for my own career, but for the people that I'm leading, these are the two things that drive my leadership through the roof, frankly. And unfortunately, we don't see much of the world, whether you're talking about business, certainly not in politics, higher education, athletics. You can look at any aspect where you could see any leaders. Not very much development is being done in the space of who, even though it's 3/4 of leadership.
Oh, you know where I'm going with this one, Ira.
Go for it.
Well, so Tim, a little backstory here on my end. Less than 15 months ago, I was laid off, and not only did I decide I was diving into the deep end of the pool in terms of entrepreneurship, but I started with something I called life work integration, based off of my times as a software sales rep, going in and out of companies and recognizing how failed work-life balance was and how it impacted the strain and the stress and the productivity. So I kind of put that as my X on the map, where I'm trying to help companies work through this and leadership develop that mindset. So that's my way of saying that I'm totally engaged with the idea that others focused and inwardly sound characteristics really set the course. I'm curious, where are the inwardly sound and other focused people so that we could develop that? Like, how do you find, like, how are organizations finding those types of people inside of their organizations? Or is there a path where somebody can get onto that can help expedite the number of people that they're developing?
Well, there's not a magic selection tool, because these things are really hard to interview for. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. I just got a question from a client here this week who is being intentional about making sure that they're interviewing for who. And, one way to do that, even though it is still very challenging, is to ask those behavior-based questions that so many people are familiar with, but to ask them with an ear towards who. So if you ask somebody about, tell me a time when you led a team to a great accomplishment, for example, to use a typical behavior-based question, if their answer doesn't include the recognition and praise for other people on the team, you should pay attention to that. Now, that doesn't mean they're a horrible person, and that doesn't mean the interview is over. But if you consistently don't hear language that suggests that other people are important to this person who's moving into a leadership position, that should give you a red flag. You should be concerned about that, because, again, this is, you put these two things together, inwardly sound, others focused. We're talking about 77% of leadership. That's an enormous percentage. So you don't want to miss on either one of these things. Now, you also ask about path. And frankly, this is the drum that I try to beat as much as I can, just because I'm so passionate about the message. But when we're talking with organizations and helping them take a look at the various leadership development initiatives and programs that they have going on in the organization, we just ask them to evaluate how many of them are about developing the core, the center of who their leaders are as human beings. And the answer is scary few. And so as an organization, if you want to have an organization filled with world-class and exceptional leaders, then you have to have world-class and exceptional leadership development, which has to include diving into these areas of inwardly sound and others focused. So from a path standpoint, if you're influencing, you're an HR leader in an organization, to step back and look at your leadership development and say, how much of this is really about helping people become And that's a really important word, because we're not just talking about skills or knowledge. We're talking about who the person is at the core of themselves as a human being. You want to help them have a path towards becoming more well-developed as a human being. And if not, you're missing on a huge part of what makes a leader effective.
And we keep hearing that message over and over again, especially the last few weeks. We've been talking about the humanness is one term, or the humanization. Going back to that we're so focused on technology and automation and so forth over the last few years. So the COVID-19 has been a wake-up call, and hopefully people are going to take advantage of that. You are listening to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show, and we've got our guest today is Tim Spiker from the Apereo, and also from Who Not What Principle. We are talking about leadership. There's certainly a huge gap or a void, I would say, and that's not a political statement by any means, but because I think both parties, whatever side you're on, are looking over the fence at the other party and saying there's a leadership void. So we're not trying to bridge that gap. Well, we are trying to bridge that gap. We're trying to get everybody on at least have a level playing field. But so we're going to continue this conversation in just a few minutes. Right now, we're going to hear from our sponsors, Zor.ai. We really thank them. They've been with us for 9 months now, so we appreciate them being part of it. You'll hear about what they do in just a minute. And then Success Performance Solutions is also a sponsor, and you'll hear from them too. So we're going to take a quick break. You can hear from them and stay right where you are. We'll be back in under 2 minutes. Hiring top talent shouldn't be left up to the roll of the dice. And yet, that's exactly what many organizations do. They roll the dice, cross their fingers, and pray for a better outcome. Hiring the right employees the first time is much too important and way too costly to leave to a game of chance. Your employees and your customers deserve better. For 25 years, Success Performance Solution has been helping small and medium-sized businesses hire smarter. They offer pre-employment and leadership assessments from typing and data entry to C-suite competence. Whether it's production, sales, healthcare, call centers, or management, Success Performance Solutions can help. Visit their website at www.successperformancesolutions.com to schedule a free demo or call 800-803-4303.
Imagine how your company would grow if your candidate experience earned a 99% approval rating. Well, to get to 99%, you need the 3 best letters in recruitment technology, XOR. Zor's text bots, chat bots, and audio bots increased IKEA's candidate conversion rate 455%. Zor decreases candidate drop-off rates, improves your candidate experience, and collects analytics for future strategies. To learn more, check out Zor.ai. That's XOR.ai.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show. I'm your host, Ira Wolf. I'm here with Keith Campagna, my co-host, and our guest today. And we've been having a great conversation with Tim Spiker from the Apereo. And as the name says, he's been revealing what leadership effectiveness looks like. We were talking about the top 2, that 75% or 77% to be more exact, of what leadership comes from. And that was inwardly sound and others focused. So, Tim, I've got 2 questions here. One is, that sounds pretty similar, not to a lot of what when people talk about emotional intelligence or emotional quotient. And for those who aren't familiar with that, it's basically one is having high self-awareness and then being able to manage yourself. So that sounds like inwardly sound to some degree. I'm sure it might be more complicated than that. And then it's also having social awareness, recognizing other people's emotions, and then the ability to do something about that. So am I right? Am I in the right track here? Is this pretty similar to that, or deeper, or?
Yeah, I think, emotional maturity. We talk about what does it mean to be emotionally mature. And that is the only one of our categories that puts a foot in both worlds of inwardly sound and others focused. Everything else that we dig into is either one camp or the other. But that one in particular, of course, Daniel Goleman's been an incredible pioneer in that space to talk about just the things you were just mentioning in terms of the emotional self-awareness, the ability to manage yourself. But ultimately, there are pieces of inwardly sound others focus that are broader than that. So one, for example, that would take us, the rest of our lifetimes to dig into. But if you talk about security, inner security, what does it mean to be secure and settled as a human being? And why is that so critical in the leadership space? Certainly that has an impact on our ability to be emotionally mature, but there's a breadth to the idea of dealing with insecurity that I think goes outside the range of what does it mean to be emotionally mature. So emotional intelligence, emotional quotient, being emotionally mature, absolutely critical part of who you are. But there are some other pieces to this story that go outside the bounds of that.
Yeah, and that's, I assume there was more. Well, obviously, there's a lot more than just self-awareness is pretty broad too. And going back to what we talked about before, self-awareness is also in order to do any of this, you have to have a high level of curiosity.
Yeah,
and that seems to be where we get stuck. And Dr. Hamilton, what her focus is not that she doesn't teach people and she doesn't assess people how to be more curious. What she does is she looks at what holds people back, because we're all curious from the day we're born. I mean, we've got a 11-month-old grandson, and he's always looking around. He's always touching. Everything's new. He touches everything. You move, and he watches you. And then all of a sudden it becomes, either it's fear or technology or, it's fear from others. It's fear of making a mistake. It's being reprimanded. We stop being curious. And that's the problem. And then there's other people that just don't have that innate nature to ask a lot of questions, which brings me to the question is I've been around a while. You're obviously been doing it and study that. Nature or nurture? You brought this up earlier a little bit. Often you hear people will say, I'm just not a good leader, or I can't be a manager. I'm just not good at supervising people. How do you help, or how can we help people get beyond that?
I mean, I think the super short answer is it's both. And, I think my observation in doing leadership work for 18 years now is that there are people that do have innate abilities to lead. They have an understanding. Sometimes it's unconscious or subconscious might be a better way to say that. And then but they can always get better. The analogy with that, I think, is akin to athletic ability or musical ability. There are people that are born with extraordinary levels, but if they're going to be the very best of their potential, they still have to practice. They still need to coach. They still need to work on their craft. And if there's not a story that's more overtold in the business space of the talent that's unfulfilled, I don't know. I mean, little rivals that one in terms of getting repeated over and over again. So no matter how you kind of entered this world, whether you have a natural inclination for leading effectively or not, I think the story is the same, is we want to work on what we've got so that we can be better than we would have been. And so regardless of where you start on the spectrum, I think that's the story.
Okay. So where do we go from here, Tim? We've got plenty of opportunity. We've got, I can't. Again, I know that you haven't listened to, sounds like you've done a decent amount of research, and thank you for that. But one of the things that just happened to work out for us on the podcast earlier in the year was how many people we just had as guests that were mindset focused, emotional intelligence focused. And I can't help but think that this is as much of a needed skill that to be developed as let's call it employee engagement software in the post-COVID world.
Yeah.
Where do we start? How are you getting people to recognize the value of leadership development now?
Well, primarily, I'm just putting the research in front of them, frankly. And I'm saying, here's the research. Here's how we did the research. And when, it's one of those things is when you show people the research and then ask them to start looking back on their own experience, the anecdotes in the research match up line by line. One of my favorite questions to ask people is, tell me about the best leader that you've ever personally followed, and just listen. and then I invite you guys to try this, invite the listeners to try this. Ask somebody that question and really listen to what they're saying, because the vast majority of what you're going to hear when you ask that question are comments about who that person is as a human being. And so people, I get the joy and the blessing of getting to be around people who are encountering that question for the first time, and you just listen to them and just reflect back to them. I do this in rooms of executives all the time, where we'll say, talk to each other about the best leader you've ever followed. And then I say, okay, we're going to go around the room and tell me what you heard from the other people that made that person the best leader that person they've ever followed. And up at the front of the room, I have a piece of paper or a flip chart where I'm keeping track of whether they talk about a what-based leadership skill or who that person was as a human being. And every single time in every room that I've ever been in, the data in that room matches up the research with 20,000 data points. And it always ends up in somewhere between 70% and 90% of the comments that come back in the room are about who that person was. And so when you give people some experiences like that, say, here's research. It's not just anecdotal. And I'm an electrical engineer by education, so that kind of freaks some people out. But I'm
a dentist.
Okay.
Really?
All right.
I'll top you.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a topper. But I love numbers. And so, yeah, there's a humanness that we're talking about, but there's also a scientific backing to this. And so once you begin to marry people's experiences with the research, then by and large, people become open. And now we begin talking about, okay, how? Find him. I buy the message. I buy the research. It makes sense. But how on earth could I actually become more others focused? How on earth could I actually become more inwardly sound? And we start down that path together to talk about what are ways that people could actually become more well-developed human beings. And so that's been our process.
Tim, are there any comments or any responses you got that stand out that you remember when you ask that question?
In terms of best leaders?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think probably the most common comment in that space is about somebody who is willing to invest time in me as a developing professional, as a developing leader. I mean, that's probably the number one quality. Now, notice what they're saying, and this is where I want to draw that distinction between the what of leadership and the who. Cultivating talent is critical. And it's really important from a leadership standpoint. And there is a skill to that. But when they talk about their own development and somebody who invested in them, they don't go on and on about how skillful the person was at asking questions. They talk about how generous they were with their time. And you think about how busy leaders are, that's why that thing stands out. So we've got to understand, even as somebody is talking about they developed me, their emphasis is almost always on the generosity of the person. And what is generosity? That's a willingness to give of your time. That's a willingness to invest. And that's that others focus piece that we're talking about.
You'll enjoy this, I think, and we will probably have to talk offline about it. But I'm working with Dr. Coker, and he'll be one of our guests in the future. I've known him for 25 years, and he created a trust profile. Are you trustworthy? And what just brought that up is that it looks at transparency, how transparent you are, which is another one of those qualities, how authentic, how relatable you are, how predictable, not that you're always right, but that people, they don't get Jekyll on one day and Hyde on the next.
Yes.
But the one of the other factors was empowerment. And it's not that do you empower people, it's do people feel empowered around you? Which was really interesting because people say, oh, well, I delegate and I share and I coach, I mentor. But on the flip side of that is, do the people feel that way? Or do they feel that they're still afraid of making a mistake? And that's what you just said.
Well, that gets back to, we mentioned secure and settled earlier. I mean, how many leaders are afraid to share the responsibility because they understand that their career, their next move is on the line if the people that they are leading don't perform. And so there's an insecurity there, there's a fear there. And so I'm trying to delegate, I'm trying to mentor, but it doesn't feel that because I'm not actually letting go, because this inner reality about me, my insecurity, or it could be just, hey, I want the next biggest paycheck. So it could just be greed. We can go there. Those things are internal, very internal to who I am. And they hold me back from being a better developer of people and developing this piece of trust. Can I say something about trust? Because trust is such a huge part of this. And I want to paint a picture for everybody around why the who, not what principle exists. And it's one thing for us to have done a research study and saying, hey, look at this, 3/4 of leadership is a function of who you are, not what you do. But it's a totally different conversation to say why. And the why isn't overly complicated, but I think it's really important if we're going to make a case for it to explain it. So we have these two qualities, inwardly sound and others focused. And when I see somebody who is stable and sane and steady, and then they add into that they're showing up for the sake of other people, my trust with that person goes way up. Trust, there's a connection between trust and engagement that does not get enough airplay anywhere, in my opinion.
No, I agree.
And so when you trust somebody and they ask you to run through a wall, you run through the wall. When you don't trust somebody and they ask you to run through the wall, you take 6 steps and kind of bump it and kind of wonder whether or not I should be doing this. What's the angle? It's obviously a metaphor, but it's an example of how we go into things and what a pivotal role that trust plays in engagement. And then, as a lot of people will have seen from Gallup, there's over 300 studies worldwide that connect engagement directly to performance and results. And so that's how it works. You start out, and I loved what you said earlier about trustworthy. We have this conversation with our clients all the time. I'm not saying that the goal of building trust is a bad goal or the wrong thing. But here's what I would rather us all talk about if we're trying to be the best leaders we can be. I would rather us talk about, how do I become more trustworthy? I think that's a better question. I think that's the more important question. And so inwardly sound and others focused begets trust. Trust leads to engagement. Engagement produces better performance and better results. We call that the arc of leadership, and that's why the who, not what principle exists.
So I'm going to let all our listeners know, right before you call Tim, go up to my website, Success Performance Solutions, and right at the top there's a button and it says white paper, how to build trust. It's a free white paper, download it, and it'll actually take you to one of the parts of that. There's actually right now it's free. There will be eventually a paywall in front of it, but right now you can take a trust profile and find out how trustworthy you are. And that's what you and I need to talk about off the show. So
okay.
How to introduce that. You were also talking a little bit about the fixed and growth mindset. Are you familiar with that principle, Tim?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, that's a problem with leaders. And we had one of the webinars 2 weeks ago with Sarah Turner. We were talking about diversity and inclusion and fixed mindset. But one of the problems is, as a leader, people get hired and then they're expected to not make any mistakes because, hey, that's what am I paying you all that money for? Why are you asking us how to do this? And, that fortunately is changing too, which fits into your principles of inwardly sound and other focus about how you lead. But that's an important function. And a lot of people, you mentioned that earlier, you referenced that sometimes people get into leaders and then they're afraid they'll screw up their career, their next career bump.
Yeah. I mean, a little bit related to that, I'd say the number one question that we get is, can people grow and develop in who they are later in life? Because there's this perception back to the fixed piece. Now, of course, this idea is in the mindset of the leader. If you have a mindset that you can't grow, then guess what's going to happen? Nothing. Right. So as a leader, you have to have the mindset. But from a statistical and a research standpoint, people took the idea of great growth in the early adolescent years. That was, originally from a Swiss psychologist, Jean Piaget. They take that, they see people later in life who are not unable, but unwilling to grow and develop. And they've reached an erroneous conclusion, which is after the age of 30, we can't really grow and develop. And there's research out there that shows it. There's various research studies that have shown it. Theo Dawson and Cheryl Armand are the two researchers that are primarily shown that. But then there's anecdotal evidence, and most of the work that we do is with people that are not in their early 20s. Lots of times they're in their 40s and 50s. And when somebody's willing to do the work, great things happen. When somebody's willing to have that growth mindset that you mentioned, great things can happen if they're willing to do the work. But they have to be willing to do the work. There was an executive that we had the privilege of working through, somebody who was really willing. And I keep saying that because it's so important. About 18 months into this work on who this leader was as a person, one of his folks came to him and said, 18 months ago, I wanted to get out of here, and you were the reason. And now I want to stay here, and you are the reason. And that's just an anecdotal story that matches up with the research, which says you don't have to be 25 years old to grow and develop in who you are.
And Tim, we're amazing. There's so many more things we can. Leadership's my topic, and I know Keith too. So we can go on forever with it. But we're almost out of time. We got just a few minutes left. How can people get a hold of you? How can they get your book? What's the best way to reach you?
Great. So thanks. Thanks. So the easiest website to find us is at onlyleaders.com. And whether you get the book from our website, it's available on Amazon. Those are two possibilities, but you have a chance there. We've got a couple of offers, one for anybody, and others for the listeners of this show. So we're going to have a study guide that's going to come out to go along with the book. And if somebody's interested in signing up to be a part of our email list, they'll get the study guide for free. But we want to make an offer to this group is that there's a promo code when you go to that website, theonlyleaders.com. There's a place for a promo code. If your listeners want to put in there 3G for the title of your podcast, then they have an opportunity. We'll take $500 off. We take people on what's called a who not what journey, and we do that over longer periods of time. But anybody that enters 3G in there, we would give them. We're starting new groups in 2021, so if anybody enters that, we would be happy to give them $500 off a who not what journey with us starting in 2021.
Appreciate it. And that's theonlyleaders.com. Is that right?
Theonlyleaders.com.
Yeah, and that's it's 3Gs, right?
3G.
GGG, not 3G.
3G. If somebody puts GGG, we're going to count it. So
okay.
we'll know where the case.
Just want to make sure. So we know we've done it. We've had people do it both ways. I do it both ways. So appreciate that.
We
Tim,
will accept either one.
Super. I appreciate that. So this has been an absolute pleasure. It's been fun, and again, we'll definitely have to have you back. Leadership. Unfortunately, I think it's still going to be. We're still going to have this void. We didn't fix it today.
Yeah. No, there's always going to be work to do, and when we run out of work for helping other people, then all we have to do to get going again is look in the mirror and see how much work we need to do on ourselves. So, there's always going to be work.
Right. And there we go, Keith. We got another one, another good one, another great opportunity. So.
Yeah, really. I mean, thank you so much, Tim and Ira. This is just such. It's optimistic. It's positive, and just kind of just dovetailing what it was that Tim just said. It starts from within you, so it's free. It doesn't cost anything. All it takes is a little bit of mindset and just trust that you could pull this off.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, we appreciate all the Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization listeners, whether it's 3G or GGG, however you want to get there. Appreciate it. To listen to any of our previous podcasts and this one, again, you can go to geeksgeezersgoogleization.com or our brand new version of that, which is besthrpodcast.com. What else is going on? Oh, and don't forget to go to besthrwebinars.com and register for the webinars coming up next week, the following week. We got Curiosity Code, we got the Future Next, we got the Talent Desert, and a few more. So go to besthrpodcasts.com, besthrwebinars.com. And we got to thank Zor.ai and Success Performance Solution again for allowing us to be here. Appreciate you being our sponsors. Please visit their websites as as well. And don't forget to join us next week, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, W4CY.com. Don't forget to listen to our podcast on Apple, Google, iHeart, Spotify. Please leave a review. Let other people know if you're liking it. Let us know if you like it, and hopefully we can continue to grow our base here. So until the next episode of Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization, this is Ira Wolf and Keith Campagna. Don't let the shift hit your plans.